Well, welcome everyone. I have a guest today, Malin Sundberg, and let's just start off with who are you?
All right. Where do I start? Well, I guess I'm originally an iOS developer. I've been doing that for a while now. I started iOS when Swift came out, basically. When the beta first came out, I tried to jump on as soon as I could, which gave me some more headaches than necessary. But yeah, I enjoyed it. Like it was good enough for me to stick with it, so that's probably a good sign.
Yeah. And what were
Um,
you before jumping into that?
um,
Had you done anything before that, or?
So I was still studying when
Oh,
I started picking up iOS development, and before that, I through university I did like computer science. I did a
sure.
few different things. Yeah, I was working in like C. I originally started learning programming in C, and then I also learned some Java, some JavaScript as well. But I felt like I guess I always sort of felt like I enjoyed the iOS ecosystem as a user, and I always been quite interested. I was sort of thinking through my when you're like a kid and there are so many things you think of, like you don't know what you want to do. But I think early on I was sort of thinking I want to do something in design, and that's why I felt once I got a Mac, I felt so excited about like the user interface and how nice it looks.
Nice.
And once Swift came out, I felt like this is the perfect opportunity to actually join this ecosystem and make something nice, make something that works really neatly, and yeah, be able to
Cool.
both do the UI design part and the development part.
And had you always been with, like, did you start on Mac OS originally, or were you on Windows before getting
Yeah,
into?
I was a bit thrown off by your question because I watched all your other sessions with other people, and you always ask why you like how people started with a Mac, and I was like prepared for it. Uh,
There's no real, it changes all the time.
you're keeping me on my toes, so it's good. Um, I guess, yeah, my background, I guess, is a bit different from like most people. I think many people in our industry have sort of been developing since they were like 10 years old and they started learning quite early on.
I
But
don't
for
think that's true
me,
for everyone.
yeah, and I feel like I'm definitely not on that side. I was sort of always I was using Windows, and I sort of used the computer that was available in the family. We had like the family computer, and that was sort of what I grew up with and what I learned. And I like used it as a tool, but I never really felt as excited about this as when I got my first Mac. So I think once I got my first Mac, that's when I sort of realized that it can like I don't know. I just felt like it was this really nice user experience and technology, and it really enables people to do so many things, and that's what I was really excited about. And then after using a Mac for a while, I actually started out once I went to university. I started studying sociology and psychology, but then I took one course in computer science, and I really liked it.
That's
So
funny.
then I realized that that's actually what I want to do, and I completely like decided like from then on I sort of both learned development at university and I ended up getting a computer science degree, but I also decided that like I basically spent all my free time learning development, learning Swift, like all those things.
Yeah,
So yeah.
that's. I mean, I feel like in my college experience, it was almost the other way, where I started doing classes and almost just wanted to do my own thing and not do my classwork. But so I'm glad.
Yeah.
I'm glad the classwork worked the other way for you, where
Well,
you were
not
interested in it after that, anyway. So
well. I guess I wasn't necessarily interested in the classwork, but I was interested in learning more development based on the classwork. So
fair
I
enough.
did I did the classwork, but then I felt like it was still not enough. So like that's why like there was no course to do like iOS development or Mac development. So I wanted to pick that up on the side.
Cool.
And yeah,
Yeah,
that's why.
I understand that itch, and there's a lot of people that I know so many people that go through. There's like the group that goes through computer science and like never do anything except the coursework, and then there's
Mm,
those that are like you and like myself, who are just I just want to do all these other things that are almost
yeah,
not
yeah,
related, but still computer science kind of related things. But
yeah.
cool. So off of that, you said you got started with iOS,
Mhm.
transitioning into the macOS world here now. How did you kind of get interested in doing Mac development?
Um, See, thinking back about it, I think it's a bit strange that I didn't do Mac development before, like until now. So, um, I, like I said, I always really enjoyed a Mac, but then I sort of jumped on iOS as a platform, which is in hindsight a bit strange that I didn't just jump on Mac when that was what I liked. But then I guess I sort of felt like iOS was something that was just quite tangible. Like it was quite easy to jump onto it and make quite a simple app in the beginning, and then you can make so many other like more complex apps. But I think that was sort of why I didn't jump on Mac earlier. But now, once SwiftUI came out, again, I guess it's sort of the same situation as when Swift came out. I sort of felt like this was a good opportunity to learn it, and it should just work, right? It should just work to like write it on SwiftUI, and then it will work on macOS and iOS. It didn't really work as perfect as it was presented. It still has some way to go, but yeah, I think I have had multiple like sort of hobby ideas that I want to do on macOS, and I felt like SwiftUI was sort of a good time to start with it. And also, I recently started doing consultant work, and I felt like my partner and I, we're doing consultant work together, and we wanted to start making our own apps at the same time. And then we just had a specific idea, which I will talk about later, that we just felt worked perfect on the Mac as a first platform to start on. And I like it now, but it's been, like SwiftUI has given us so many headaches.
Yeah, interesting. So yeah. I mean, one of the main reasons I actually wanted to have you on was specifically because you're one of the few people that contacted me with explicitly SwiftUI work on macOS, and personally, I haven't really done that much on it, so I'm not even going to really pretend that I know that much. And I kind of wanted to actually have you on to talk a lot about that sort of journey, I guess, and seeing. I mean, I checked out the app that you'll show in a bit, and it's actually a fairly built app, and so it's not just like you made a project and put two things together kind of thing. And so it's definitely kind of want to ask you, moving into your app here shortly, about kind of what were the biggest sort of challenges, I guess, you had that are macOS specific to SwiftUI, perhaps.
Yeah. I don't really know where to start. Like there are so many, it's different things all the time. I have a laundry list of like blog posts I want to write. Don't get me wrong, SwiftUI, I love it as a concept. I think it has great potential, and I see where it's supposed to go. But I think it should maybe been called a beta now. I think like you were sort of hinting at it, like you would maybe do something like a simpler app at first. You would maybe do something that's like a single window app and something that uses quite a lot of native components. But you definitely notice that SwiftUI, I think, is more mature on iOS, but then on macOS it feels a bit like it was it has either not been given as much focus, or the documentation hasn't given as much focus.
I'm sure there's both on that.
Yeah. It just feels like, I mean, you probably know how it is. If you're searching for something on Google or on Stack Overflow, it's like as soon as you search for something Mac related, it's already narrowing down your search results. If you do SwiftUI on macOS, like you're gonna have like a one-page search result sometimes, and it's those are things just like. Trying to figure out how to do things in SwiftUI for macOS was quite difficult considering how new it is. And I guess you shouldn't be surprised about it, but I think we were sort of told that like it works on iOS and it will work on macOS. So I was sort of hoping that I can interpret all the documentation that's there for for iOS, and then apply it to macOS. But it's not always applicable.
Right. Yeah. That was definitely kind of how it was sold at the keynote specifically, was it's this new UI framework. It works across all the platforms. So you should just have to know one thing, and that'll be it. Exactly. And so it sounds good in theory. And then you kind of realize that, I mean, macOS has a lot of components that I don't think a lot of people actually account for, that are hidden there, that SwiftUI just kind of has a shim maybe around some of it, but there are still a lot of things that aren't really encapsulated there. So
I think, I mean, it's sort of, I don't want to make this like a discussion about React Native. It's not the same thing as React Native, but you always have to like. I guess it's the same as Catalyst. You can sort of say that on paper it looks like you write it once, then you click then you check a checkbox, and then it works everywhere. But I think you still need to have experience and understand how the Mac works and how iOS works, how watchOS works, for it to be like a native feeling experience. And I think even if you use Catalyst and if you use SwiftUI, I think you still need to understand that the platforms work very differently. And it's very important to actually look at good examples of like native, like AppKit app or AppKit apps to actually figure out how it should work. And then you can do it, but there are a lot of hoops you have to jump through. Like multi-window support is something that you still need to add some AppKit things in for if you want to have anything like if you want to have things like a status bar icon or an item. You will have to add AppKit for those type of things. Shortcuts you need AppKit for. Like there are many things on Mac that aren't there for SwiftUI, and we expected that there would be some things like that, but then there are other things that you think would work. For example, navigation flows. We expect it to be quite an easy thing to start like tackling, and we thought that would be like something that works very like out of the box, I guess. Right. And that's something I want to go through in the examples later, that something that you think is relatively easy, like a navigation flow, is not actually working as you expect it to.
Yeah. I know I've had some various, I mean, I haven't done too much, like I said, but I have browsed some of the Stack Overflow posts for macOS SwiftUI related content, and there's just some really weird stuff out there where it's like, you know, because it's all declarative, you just kind of expect that what you declare should be kind of what happens. And when it doesn't happen that way, it does seem very, I mean, maybe you can speak to this a little bit, but I know, at least personally, when I had first worked with it, I had a brief time while I was at Apple to kind of play with the framework, specifically on macOS. Okay. And I remember it being a nightmare to debug then. I don't know if that's significantly better now, but as I kind of see it, it's like you set a particular thing, you know, you define the frame to be this, and then it doesn't show up in that particular location. And I wonder if you could talk to maybe the debuggability aspects of that, because in my mind, AppKit was always very straightforward in that respect, or UIKit, right? You define the frame or you define the constraints, and one of those, right, is going to be right or wrong, and you can go into the view debugger. It's pretty obvious what's going wrong, but well, at least obvious in that you can debug it, right? So
and I guess you also get error messages if you have a typo on a line, for example. You know that there's a typo on that line. That's something I think that was something that was quite different in SwiftUI, and I think I think originally, when SwiftUI came out, it was really hard to troubleshoot it if something went wrong. So you would get an alert message at the top of the body of the SwiftUI view saying that basically something is wrong in this file or any of the related files or any of the leaves that are attached to this. That's fun. I guess it's sort of like debugging without like any type of tools to help you. And you get used to it, but I don't know if it's something you should get used to. But then after, I think, was it in February, there was an update to Xcode, and there was an update to the Swift compiler, I believe, that basically what they do is that they dig deep, like just on a high level. If there is an error being thrown in a view, they will continue trying to fix this error and try to sort of debug, like dig deeper into find the actual error that causes the problem. So if there's like a view 3 hierarchies down in your SwiftUI file, then it will detect the actual line that is causing the problem. And that helped a lot. Like you were like from probably, I think it was February onwards, those type of errors became a lot more prominent, and like that was super helpful. So I would say it's definitely getting better. One recommendation I would give to people is that like try to split everything up into like as small leaves as possible. So like if you have like a row, which includes like 2 separate like items, you want to show something on the left side, something on the right side, you could maybe even like split those two components out and then have the row as a separate component and then have like the list that uses all those different rows. They're just like splitting it out into those leaves can help you debug it a lot easier because you will know where things are breaking, and you can sort of puzzle it together. And that's like a great way of designing it in the first place because you can reuse the components easier.
Right.
Yeah, but it's definitely been a bit of a challenge to try to get things to work. But yeah, I think we got something working now. I'm quite happy with the solutions that we found, but yeah, you sort of have to be a bit creative with the solutions you're figuring out. And yeah, I think you like I'm trying to compare it to like when Swift came out, and I think Swift felt a bit more mature when it came out. It was like it was sort of easier to learn because I would say it was more supported. Like it was quite easy to find solutions online. Like if you search for a problem in SwiftUI, you could find it quite easy. In Swift, you could find a solution quite easily. Whereas SwiftUI can just have so many different variables included in it. It's like everything depends on where you lay things out. Things depend on which platform you're trying to support. And yeah, there are just so many different edge cases that are making it harder to debug.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, none of this is to really bash it at this point. I mean, it is its first year actually being a public release. So, I mean, I'm going to be really interested to see what a lot of the announcements are, this online dub to see what kind of improvements they plan on making. But I'm not exactly super hopeful for the macOS improvements, but I am at least hopeful for generic SwiftUI improvements that they'll be making. So.
Yeah, no, I'm really looking forward to it. I think it can definitely. There are many things to improve, and I think as soon as you will notice a significant. I think if they put focus on the macOS version this year, then there will be significant changes that I think will really help.
Yeah.
But I think
that's a very big if. That.
Yeah.
Well, it's an unfortunate if, but I don't know. I just know the number of resources that are on macOS in particular, and in comparison, it's just. I mean, I think a lot of the components for SwiftUI, at least initially, there's a lot of support from AppKit in particular. So a lot of the AppKit team really gets pulled into a lot of that work, and that team is not nearly as large as, I mean, as you can imagine, the UIKit team or any of the other iOS related ones. So it's a matter of priorities, but hopefully with it becoming maybe closer to one platform, maybe it's there will be some carryover into both spheres. And I think that one interesting thing kind of comes out of it is like iPadOS is kind of growing into this macOS thing. I don't know if it's a really great version of it, but regardless, it's becoming more of a desktop kind of environment. And so they're going to end up facing some of these challenges, I think, there as well, to incorporate all this mouse support stuff and things. And I think they're going to come back around to, I mean, I know macOS is old, but there are things that were built for it that just make more sense for mouse and keyboard. And so there's concepts that'll be shared, I'm sure. But
so yes, do you think? I think that's an interesting topic, sort of like iPadOS versus getting more mature versus like the focus on Mac. What do you think is more likely? Do you think it's more likely that they will continue making the cursor support better and continuing adding more and more tools for that, or do you think something like macOS and SwiftUI will be higher priority?
That is a good question. I honestly think the support is probably more behind iPad at this point. It's hard to say. I mean, when I think about really what macOS is versus what iPadOS is, a lot of it does come down to really just this UI shim layer around it, right? I mean, there's not huge fundamental differences on the underlying platforms of them. So in that regard, it's kind of just, I think the parts that are getting weird now are the parts around window management. And I think macOS window management is just far superior to iPad window management. Like, I just get infuriated with the number of times I swipe right accidentally when I'm reading a book and I bring in a new window. I can't tell you the number of times I've done that. And there's just things about iPadOS that I mean, if I'm screwing them up, I'm not the greatest person in the world, but I'm just saying, compared to my grandmother who's using it, like I don't really know where that split is that people are really looking for, and so I think it's a roundabout way to really answer the question, I guess. But I think most of the support's probably going to go into iPad OS, but I wouldn't be surprised if we start kind of just seeing Mac OS things more on. I mean, that's what we've been seeing for, I guess, since the iPad inception. Really, is just it's becoming more of a windowed environment, and but it still is a slightly smaller form factor, which makes it just slightly different.
Yeah. Yeah, it will be interesting. I'm really looking forward to WWDC. I think it's probably like just over 20 days now. So
it's coming up.
Yeah,
so
we'll see.
It's weird in my mind because in my mind it's like the first week of June always. So
yeah, it's it's supposed to be right now.
Right. I'm like, where's Dub? But anyway, all right. Great. So we'll kind of break there, and then we'll jump into talking about the app that you worked on. All right, so this is the Orbit app that you guys worked on. That's mostly SwiftUI, and why don't you just show us how it works?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, Orbit is a time tracking and an invoicing system. So at the moment, it allows you to basically keep track of all of your clients that you're having. So if you're doing client work or consulting work, this is sort of this came out of me doing consulting work and also doing a lot of time tracking in the past. I sort of felt like there were no good Mac apps, and that's why I felt like I wanted to focus on that. So we have the first functionality is obviously the time tracking. So here you can see all of the time that you've been tracking, and you can resume the latest timer that you tracked. And you can also view details. So this is this opens a separate window, and you can see all the time that you've been tracking for this particular project today, including all of your breaks. So if you're stopping it in between, or if you're idle from your computer, we will show up an alert and ask if you want to remove that time and add it as a pause or a break. So that will show up here as well.
Cool.
Yeah, so that's how you resume something. But if you want to create a new timer, you can just start it. Just by clicking plus and going ahead and just creating a new project. Just go ahead and create a new time entry. And you can just start it like that. And then the next thing is probably this client list, which is showing you a way of managing all of your clients and all of your projects. So you can look at your project, you can see how far through your budget you are, and you can see how much time you've been tracking so far.
Cool. Looks very contacts-esque.
Yeah. And then if you want to have an overview of how much you actually been working, we have this dashboard view where you can see how much you worked each day. So this was it's only 5 days through the week, so we show those 5 days. But if we show last week, that shows the 7 days of the week and how much you've been working. And then it shows a split of what you spend your time on.
Very nice.
Yeah. And then the last thing would be this, which is something I will touch on later. So this is our invoice view, which is basically allowing you to create and send invoices to users, to your customers. And then you can also double click here to display it in more detail. Yeah.
All right. So let's start with sort of what was your what were one of the main pain points that you had with SwiftUI and making this app?
Yeah, so first I want to say something I really liked. I think that's a good start. I think
that sounds good.
I just think that it was quite easy to get started and be able to start with different components and then build those components to make up an entire view. So for example, we started with this day selector and started with displaying the relevant data here, and that was just quite easy to get up and working quickly. And then things like creating new things, anything like creating a new client, for example. These type of forms are just tedious to do at least in UIKit, and I can imagine it being the same in AppKit. But it's really nice that you can sort of observe all of the fields in order to get all of the new values. You don't have to sort of listen to the change of the text field. You can just bind to a string, and then you get all the information and you get the latest text. So that's really nice. But we did have a few different problems as well. So, for example, this list was actually quite difficult to get working, and I have a sample project that I want to show you sort of how we went through that to fix it. But you see here, I can actually like go through it with my up and down arrows, which is what you expect from a Mac. And I think I think that was something that we really struggled getting right, surprisingly. Okay. Like we felt like this would be quite a simple view to go ahead and work on, but this was actually quite hard to find resources on. And if you use the the iOS approach, you lose a lot of benefit. Like there are a lot of different downsides. So for example, you might not be able to do like double click, and you might not get the selection right or the highlight right. But if you, I will go into that a bit more in the sample project. Another thing that we struggled with was this date picker. So if you add a new timer, I don't know why this is going so slow. Sorry about that. So if you want to record the time manually instead, we have this date picker, which is displaying this type of picker view. And this was actually a wrapped AppKit view, because we had lots of different problems with the SwiftUI picker. And
is the SwiftUI picker different, or does it not use the NS date picker? That
it is working differently in the way that it doesn't really, like in the way that it responds to your changes, it works quite differently. So like I can go with my like up and down keys to change the time here, but with the SwiftUI date picker, this would cause the first responder to be reassigned every time you change. So it would start at the beginning of the date instead.
I see.
So every time I make a change here, it's like I can't continue making multiple steps. It would actually just go to the start of the view again.
Gotcha.
So it's we had a few different problems with the first responders and the way that they worked. That was one of the bigger ones. Another problem was related to pickers, because we sort of need these pickers to bind to each other. So if you change a client, we want to retrieve the project for that client, right? Sure. And in order for that to actually work, we needed to set up a sort of our own binding mechanism to account for the update and then make the network call, which wasn't as straightforward as we were hoping. We felt like this was the perfect candidate for SwiftUI, but we had a few different problems with this view. And then obviously there's also the status bar item. So if you start a timer, you want to display a status bar, like a menu bar. Right. And this was just something that we couldn't really do in SwiftUI. So we ended up adding AppKit for that. Okay. And I guess another thing is the window support, or the multi-window support. So for example, if I want to bring up something like a settings screen, like a regular preference pane, this was something that is not really a SwiftUI component, as we needed to wrap our own preference window and add our own preference tabs for this to work, so that you could actually go through and change your settings here. So this was.
You're saying the tab bar in particular was a AppKit component, basically, or
both? Yeah. So the window, we basically have to. There are a few different things. We have to make sure that we are creating a new window. Or in general, all the window creation is AppKit, and then we inject our own SwiftUI views in there, and we basically wrap them in the AppKit window. So what we needed to do was to actually have like this helper function, which manages all of your windows and creates new windows. And every time so we create that window, and then we sort of initialize that window with the view that we want to display, which is in SwiftUI view. So this is a SwiftUI view, and like all of those different ones are SwiftUI, but the tabs themselves are AppKit views. Right. And the window is something that we're using AppKit to spawn as well.
Cool.
And then I think the window is something that we really, really wanted. Like we wanted multi-window support because we just feel like that is something that makes the app more of a powerful tool. Like, for example, if you want to display like this view, for example, maybe you want to compare what you worked on today and you want to compare it to another one.
Right.
Then we want to be able to actually display them multiple times like this. And yeah, that was something that we really, really want to focus on, which we had to add AppKit for.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
All right. Do you want to dive into some of the sample code that?
Sure. So I set up a sample project which basically demonstrates this. So like I said, this is something that we really wanted to feel good. Like we wanted you to be able to use the keyboard to go through this. And we also wanted to be able to have like deselection state so that you get out here and we don't display something if you're not there.
Is that just when you click outside of the?
Yeah. Exactly. So that's sort of what we focused on. So I will show you how we did that. I'm first going to start with running this project and just show you my sample project that I have so far. And yeah, I'm quite new to this. So if you have any idea of like better approaches to approach those things, please let me know.
Sure. Probably don't. So.
This is basically the same, like a similar list to what I have in the app that it shows all the clients, and then it just shows the name of the client. So this seems promising. I think you can click here, but you can't click outside. Like this doesn't do anything. It just keeps on displaying the old view. And if I use my keyboard to go up and down, it like resigns the first responder.
Yeah. But it still moves. At least kind of because it like moved to the next one, which is kind of weird. But and if you see, it even selects that one, right? So it's displaying it. So the way I implemented this was sort of the approach that I took from seeing a lot of examples that were very iOS focused, and I thought that should work on macOS, right? So what I did was to add this navigation view, which is the sort of recommended way of getting this navigation view with a sidebar, a side view. So I added that navigation view, and then in there I have my list, which has the header, which is just the clients. And then I went through all of the clients that I have. This is just some dummy data. And then I add this navigation link. And the idea behind this navigation link is that it's supposed to, you're giving it a destination, which is basically, so it basically has a link to whatever view you want to display when that one is being selected. And then I just set the title or the text that I want to display in this list item. So this was sort of the idea that I thought would work first. I'm also adding this empty selection view, which is just displayed while there are no selected clients. So it's just like when you initially launch the app, it shows this empty selection view because none of them are selected. So let me just build it. There we go. So it's this one. And I also thought if I have that empty selection view, that should be displayed when I click here, but that's not working. So what I did was to go through this and just try to figure out why it sort of like looks like it's losing the first responder. So what I did was to add this binder. So I was adding a binder for the selection instead. And the good thing, I don't know how familiar you are with like adding those custom binders in the body, but it's basically a way to like, it's basically a way to get a getter and a setter for the variable, which you can't really get if you just have a state. So the reason why I did this was so that I could then print the new value. So I will show what happens then. So I'm just going to print that. And instead of binding to my state, I am going to bind to this value instead. And I'm going to use that for the selection. So then every time you select a navigation item, it will call this to set it, and then we will be able to print a new value, and we will be able to set the new, Right.
the overall selected state.
Gotcha.
So I'm going to run this. So let's have a look. So I'm just going to clear this. So now when I select one, it gets it first, but now it sort of sets it to nil afterwards. So it triggers twice, and then like it resets the selected value. So that seems to be like why it's losing the first responder. And I assume that might be because in iOS, this would be like a tap down action. And when you tap back up, you wouldn't have selected the item anymore.
Interesting.
That's just my idea that might be the reason. So we had to find a different approach. So we decided to move away from this navigation link. So we don't need this binder anymore. But there are different ways of doing this type of getting a similar behavior. So we started looking into my partner and I started looking at what the navigation view does, or what the different options are. So we found this other solution, which is looking like this. So it's very similar. So we still have the navigation view, and then we have our list. But instead of having like a navigation item attached to it, we would just have like a dumb list, which is setting the text. So that's basically displaying the left-hand panel here. And then a navigation view takes two items. So it takes the list that goes on the left, and then it also takes a side view, which is basically where the empty view was in the previous example. But what we can do here is to actually just set a selection to be part of the list. So as soon as you tap an item in the list, it sets its selection. And if that is selected, then we're going to display the detail view. Otherwise, we display the empty selection.
Gotcha.
And I'm just going to run it. Here we go. So now you get the regular selection. And if you tap here, we get the no selection state as well.
Also noticed that it wasn't, in your previous case, it was like still selected, but wasn't first responder or something like that, where it showed it was like grayed out selection, but which
when you launch it,
which it seemed to be fixed in this case. So
yes,
good.
Yeah, and you can also use the keyboard to go up and down.
Cool.
This is such a straightway approach of fixing it, but at that point there was just not much documentation about this, and even Apple's documentation was very very SwiftUI for iOS focused. So This was the examples that you could find. After that, all of Apple has released a sample project for Mac specifically, and that does use this type of approach, but it's sort of like this. It's not very, like I said, it's not part of the other sample project, so it has been hard to find. So I guess this could be something useful for people if they are running into this. This is sort of the approach that I found to be better to take, and it's really, I think it will stop you from having a lot of headaches if you go with this approach instead.
Cool.
Yeah. Then I had a few other things related to this view that I want to go into. Did you have any other questions about this approach?
Sounds good to me.
All right. I just wanted to show what happens if you have a mouse. Actually, I need to comment this out. So what I want to show is something that we weren't aware of first, because both me and my partner have a trackpad attached to our computers, so we didn't run into this. But if you look in your general settings, there's this thing which is scroll bars are shown automatically based on mouse or trackpad.
Gotcha.
Have you run into any problems with this before?
Not. I mean, I don't think so.
Okay. Well, that's good for you.
So I probably haven't done enough to actually warrant a problem on the scroll bar stuff.
I think that's a nice problem to not have run into. But if you had that selected, and I should have shown this in the demo before, if you just have this basic, like this default way of setting up your project, like you don't overwrite anything, you get these scroller gutters. And it's not just vertically, it's also horizontally, when you will never be able to scroll this list horizontally. And this, I don't like the look of this. It feels unnecessary, and it also sort of defeats the purpose, because the gutters should be there to indicate that you can scroll, but in this scenario, there's nowhere to scroll.
Yeah. I want to say AppKit's generally smart enough to know that it shouldn't show the scrollers unless it's actually scrollable, but
yeah. Usually it is, and we were testing this in many like AppKit apps, like different system apps, and we noticed that like this was not a problem in any other app that's written in AppKit. So we did some digging, and then we figured out that the way that SwiftUI is handling the auto hide scrollers by default. So basically, what I think often happens in many AppKit apps is that when this is enabled, the auto hide scrollers will be true. So auto hide scrollers basically, from my understanding, is that it only displays the scrollers if there's content to scroll.
Right.
And I think this seems to be the more default behavior if you have this, if you do have automatic based on mouse or trackpad. But in SwiftUI, it seemed to be forced to be displayed all the time, and that's why we see those. And there's no SwiftUI sort of hook-in or no value that you can set for your SwiftUI view to actually decide this behavior. It just uses whatever the default is underneath, and there's no way to change that. So this is where we started, I don't know, maybe I should call this like hacking with SwiftUI to some extent. But we think this felt like a reasonable solution to us. So a clip view is something that is being displayed both for table views and for scroll views in SwiftUI. So you have the SwiftUI scroll view and table view, and it's sort of wrapped in this clip view above it, which determines like which part of the window is displayed. So this part is this clip view. So we figured out that that's what's being used, and then we decided that we're going to overwrite the function because in our scenario we never, like for our particular app, we never want to display the scrollers unless they are needed, and we just felt like that was the more proper behavior for our type of app. So we decided to call the super here and set auto hide to true ourselves. I
assume you probably get that behavior for free in the case where you do the navigation view approach that you first had, is my guess. I don't know, maybe that's not true, but I imagine that in the first case, if you had the navigation view set up, that it probably, if you had a long, like, even if I imagine it just works correctly in the normal case, but I imagine it's because you have this sort of VStack setup that and there must just be something about the having that particular thing in there that it's not correctly set up. But anyway,
let me try. I just want to check. That's a good question. Because we noticed the same thing in our sort of sidebars in the view. So if you look at our app, we also have this type of list. And this one had the same behavior. It also had the gutters. It was basically like anything that's a list or a scroll bar or a scroll view had it. But maybe it's related to that. Let's have a look. I comment this back out. Right, there we go. Yeah.
No, just as well done. All right. Well,
good theory, though.
They didn't think about it at all. That's very strange. That I'm surprised nobody would have kind of.
We reported this as a bug, and we have sort of done some back and forth on the radar for this. We'll see. Maybe it's something that's being changed for the next at WWDC. So hopefully. But we felt a bit. In general, I feel a bit uneasy trying to guesstimate what SwiftUI is doing underneath, but I felt like this was a relatively safe thing to change, because worst case we set the scrollers to true. I don't think this is going to go back and cause any problems for us.
It's definitely, you're overriding a method on an existing class in a category is very weird to do, which is what you're doing here. But and it has its own host of problems. But like, for example, if you were to put this into like a framework and you ship something like this, then it's not actually clear on which it's not clear that the category would actually win for, because you're overriding the same method on a clip view. So it's actually somewhat indeterministic on whether you'd actually get this category to do its thing. So it works in local projects, but in like a framework case, it would be frowned upon / might not work.
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
So it's a solution that would probably work in your project, but it's certainly not a long-term solution anyway. So.
Yeah. I'm hoping that Apple is finding a like at least giving us control over this so that we can decide it ourselves. Sure. But yeah, like I feel like it. I don't feel like it will cause problem for us, but I agree. It feels a bit like it definitely it's a workaround, right? So that is something that we're trying to avoid, but in this scenario we felt like it was worth it. Yeah. Would you have a idea of how to solve it in a different way that's not overriding it?
Not really, because you don't have any real control over the fact that NS clip view is going to be embedded in, because it's all declarative, right? You're not actually creating the scroll view that has a clip view in it, right? Mm-hmm. So I mean, if it was AppKit, you could just change the clip view and that'd be, you solve your problem to, you could subclass and it'd be fine. But yeah, in this case, this is one of those things with this declarative layout where you don't really control exactly the underpinnings of what it is. But anyway.
Which I think is something Apple sort of wants. They want this sort of abstraction. But yeah, sometimes that would be fine. But I'm still missing some behavior, and I think in this scenario it was worth it, because as soon as, even if someone has a trackpad attached to their computer and a mouse, as soon as that mouse is there, this is gonna happen, and this is quite a common default setting to have as well. Yep. So that's how it felt. Yeah. Another thing that I want to show was double clicking. I don't know if that's something that is, it's a bit different. So in SwiftUI, we haven't really, there are gesture recognizers that you can use to get the double gesture. So if you're like double clicking this view, this row, in order to have some type of action, it's quite common for macOS apps to, for example, display this detail view in a separate window if you double click this. But that was something that we had problems with, because if you add a tap gesture and you recognize the double tap, that sometimes messes up the highlight state. So we noticed that sometimes when you do a double tap, we're either not getting highlight, or we might get highlight on it keeps on highlighting another item, but it's not the one that you double clicked. And we also added some other workarounds to be able to try to get that working. But yeah, we just couldn't get double click to work. And finally, I'm gonna give credit to my partner for finding this out. We found out the way yesterday of how to enable double click, and we haven't really been able to do this in any other way. Okay. I'm happy to show you if that's something. Yeah.
I think we probably only have time for this last one, but that's good.
Of course. So what we added for that is another extension where we are wrapping things around or where we're overriding AppKit.
That's fine. I like this just entry point into configuring AppKit layers.
Yeah, it doesn't. I think you should be cautious when you do this, but we haven't seen any side effects yet. But please let me know if this is a terrible idea.
I mean, it's one of those things. I mean, even AppKit has these problems too, where you don't really get the control that you want out of a control, and then you just end up. I mean, obviously this is maybe a little more hacky than what you could do in AppKit, just because you could probably subclass it. But under the circumstances,
yeah,
you do what you do to make it work. So
yeah, our focus has really been on making something that is great on the Mac, and we really want this to be nice native feeling app, and we really wanted to feel like a Mac app, and that's sort of why we felt like having this ability to open a window. So an example that we have in our app is here in invoices. You might often have like 2 different invoices and you want to compare them. So we want to be able to actually open it in a separate window like this. So that was why we felt like this was just a perfect use case for us that we really want to get working.
Sure.
So like I said, the double click on tap gestures had a few different problems. So what we did was to find try to hook into the double action of a table view. So this is something you can set quite easily in AppKit, I believe. Right. So we have the table views double action, and we need to set a selector to that. And this is something that we're not getting access to directly through SwiftUI. So what we decided to do was to overwrite this function, and we get the double action in the table view, and we set it to our app delegates table view double action. So we set it to this selection, and this seems a bit strange because you would think that this impacts all of the views that have a table view, and in theory, like yes, it does. But if you look at this function, all we do in the AppKit in the app delegate is to just have a selector here. So this one doesn't actually do anything. But what we can do now when we have this selection, the selector is to add, let me just write it down. So what we can do is to add this onCommand function, which is something that SwiftUI is providing. So on each of our text like list items, we're adding this onCommand function.
Interesting.
Which takes a selector. And in this scenario, for this particular view, we're gonna take the selector of the app delegate.
So is that just like hijack the, like when it sees that get called, it basically triggers this closure here?
Yeah, exactly. So it listens to the selector command, and then it will trigger this closure. So then we will get the client, and we will be able to initialize the view we want to set, and then we will use a window helper, which is just a simple AppKit sort of window helper function class that we made, and then we will show it.
Sure.
I think it might not find this. Let me check if this builds. I don't know what that error is about. So there we go. Yeah, so this will basically allow us to do a double click. So we still have the single gestures.
Yep.
And then if you go here and then double click, wait a second. Oh, sorry, this is still the old navigation view. So this does not work if you, 1 second. There we go. I think that's the problem. Just ignore this one.
Welcome to Xcode.
So there we go.
Cool.
So now we have the window. We have multiple windows. So the list is basically keeping track of our selected client, and that's how we know which one to display. And this will only be executed for this particular view because this is the only one that uses this selector. But if we would want multiple views, like multiple different table views to have a double click action, we can use this selector. We can listen to this selector in other views as well. So for example, if you have a separate view, you would be able to trigger different actions and display different views depending on which SwiftUI view is binding to it.
It must have to be on the list though to get that to work, does it not? Like the action itself, it wouldn't work on just any view wouldn't it have to be the table view for that to work? Maybe not, but.
So you mean like whether or not you could just do it on a regular view?
Yeah, right. Like even if it was even if the table view is what triggered it, I'm just trying to think of like how SwiftUI would do this, and because it's not dynamic, so it must have some way of knowing that there was a like a selector trigger that was coming from this component. But
yeah, so you mean that like
I'm
it
wondering
doesn't
if
really make sense if you would have a table view action or a table view selection being triggered and then bind it to a non-list. Is that
right? Yeah.
Yeah. No, I
Maybe I'm
I
not
should
sure.
try,
I don't
but
really
I
know.
would
I don't really
feel-
know how the on command works exactly, but I'm
Yes,
trying to figure out how that would
I believe that.
understand what select was being called. So
Yeah, yeah. No, I believe this is like mostly meant to be used for you to be able to get a selector. It would be interesting to try it out
yeah,
on different elements, but
it's
yeah,
definitely a nice workaround to
yeah,
get it to
yeah.
work though. So
Thank
interesting.
you.
Very
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, no, it's really exciting because I don't know why we're so excited about like double click, but it's something that's been like a thing we've been like going on and off trying for like
Yeah, I
multiple
mean,
weeks.
I'm sure there's people watching this that I have a few people that contact me about SwiftUI all the time, and I have no idea about any of it. So I figured I'll have you on, and you can explain what all the pitfalls are, so that I don't have to do them. But cool.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, this works, and yeah, if anyone wanna chat about it, they're
Yeah.
more than welcome to.
Everyone can leave a comment and tell us how the other ways of doing the same thing are. But
Yeah. No, I would love to hear other ways because I just really want this to work nicely at this point, and I feel like this is a reasonable way of doing it. But yeah, there might be other downsides with it. So
yeah, well,
yeah.
I have a feeling after this dub I have to kind of get into SwiftUI because it's clearly becoming the interest of everyone to learn it. So
Yeah.
cool. Very nice. Cool. The last thing I wanted to ask you briefly was just about your Vapor stuff. So you mentioned that this is the backend for, I think this client basically is a Vapor 4 or Vapor 3 or Vapor 4 server, and I just wanted to get kind of a brief comment from you on how you felt that worked out for you guys.
Yeah, so we're using Vapor 3 at the moment. We will migrate to Vapor 4 once it's actually released, but we didn't want to start picking it up while it was still in beta, just because it might be enough to work with like SwiftUI as one sort of like new framework.
That's right.
But we're definitely gonna move over to Vapor 4 soon because there's some really nice things in there. And overall, I'm quite happy with the decision of doing it. It was my first Vapor project that I was like really like making for a production app. Right. But my partner has been doing it for, I think he done it for 2 other apps before this.
Gotcha.
And I think even though we both sort of have experience with PHP, like we just felt like we like Swift, right? And if we're able to write something in Swift, then that's something we were excited about doing. And even though we both have experience in other languages and like other tools, we just felt like this would be our way of kickstarting it as soon as possible. We just feel more comfortable in Swift. We feel very comfortable with Xcode, and we just felt like it was quite a good position for us. And we were able to reuse a lot. What I like about it is that a lot of the components are reusable, and we also get things like codable and those type of things. So I think overall we were quite happy with the decision, and I thought there would be. I didn't think it would be as smooth as it's been. Like I would say it's been surprisingly easy. Like we actually been quite happy with it. Yeah. I think if you want to do like a longer talk about the specifics, I would be happy to do that as well. But yeah, overall, like I've been enjoying it a lot.
Cool. All right, well, we'll have to do a second chat where we talk about Swift on the server. But all right, well, that's pretty much all I have time for in this section. The only other thing I want to let you do is to plug whatever links or social media company pages you want to plug.
Yeah. So obviously there's the app. It's called Orbit. The website we have a website for it, which is timeinorbit.com. So if you want to find a link for it, depending on when this episode is out, we will either have our pre-order page up or we will have the actual app link there. But that's the best place to look for it. And if you want to get in touch with me, I think Twitter is probably the better way. And my Twitter handle is just malinsundberg.com. No,
Great.
not .com. Malin Sundberg. Just Malin Sundberg. My website is malinsundberg.com, but that's not very exciting. So just contact me on Twitter instead.
All right. Well, I'll leave all that in the description, and thanks again for coming on.
Yeah, awesome. Great chatting with you.
If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to the channel, give this video a like, and share it with your friends. Ways to contribute and additional information are in the description. I'll see you next week.